Okay, we'll give you the first question, Sarah. What's your question?
Well, it's just a term that is, it's something I need to catch up with. It's common to the way you're talking, and I forgot to ask it. It's about proper and improper.
Yes.
Proper embodiment, improper embodiment, proper embodiment, and I just wanted you to give me a little bit more on that, just to, I think I'm intuiting the meaning there, but...
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Is there anything to fill it out just a little bit?
I'll try. You're at disadvantage in terms of my use of those terms simply because I invented all of that, which is my wont. In this case, about a year ago, in the course that we taught last spring, the questions course. And I guess it was in the course of that I found it useful to use that terminology. Especially, I think it came up originally in the context of the question about evil. And so it could get complicated, but to try and give you a short answer to the point, to be, for example, properly embodied in omnipotence would be to be creating the world. To be improperly embodied in omnipotence would be not to be creating the world. The point being that in either case, whether you're doing what in the thinking now occurring is the good, namely to create the world, and this you can find textually in Beyond Sovereignty, that definition of the good in section 2, the Critique of Badiou, probably in 2.2, but I'm not sure of that, somewhere in section 2. So in other words, you can, if you're doing the good, you're creating the world in the context of thinking now occurring, and you are properly embodied in omnipotence. But if you're not doing the good, you still exist. And you are still, in some sense of the word, doing. Of course, what you're doing is nothing. That is, you're not creating the world. You're in one way or another, one form or another, the forms of which are at least 12-fold, as articulated on the index at the Ethics of Simplicity. You're still, as it were, embodied in omnipotence, but you're improperly so. You're not, right? You're screwing things up. Is that it all helpful?
That alone is helpful, Dave. Thank you.
Okay.
I can look further in Beyond Sovereignty.
Yes, and it's going to come up. Today I'm going to distribute a handout of which you already have a copy. And I use that term on the handout, and so it'll come up again in today's class.
Thanks very much.
Okay. Questions, comments?
I have a question about properly lacking. There's a new term that you're introducing here. I'm not quite sure what is meant by it. Particularly on the
yes, I will. I just want to let her finish the question. Go ahead.
It's about the resurrection that this term comes up particularly.
Okay. Do you remember? Do you have it in one of the handouts? Or?
It is in the last handout. In the last, under Matthew, the first page. It's concerning the resurrection.
Second paragraph from Matthew.
Well, the second, but also the 1, 2, 3, 4, 3 and 4.
All right, this is the handout from last week, first page, under the quotation from Matthew.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
And you said the fourth paragraph?
The fourth and fifth. It says,
And the second.
Events of second order, nature properly lacking to the first nature.
Oh, yes. Okay. All right. Let me just repeat this for Sarah. Sarah, Voltraut's asking a question about the use of which is actually related to your question, in effect, the use of the term properly, or did I say, yeah, in this case, properly lacking, which is found on page 1 of last week's handout in the, as Nancy points out, in both the terminologies. I really should label these paragraphs. In the first paragraph where Leahy's talking under Matthew, it's mentioned there. The term is used there, and it's used in the next paragraph after that on page 1 of last week's handout, and perhaps again, once again. Okay. Let me take a look at the first use, which is in the at the crucifixion paragraph on page 1 of that handout. Neither of these resurrections is the resurrection at the last day, which is not yet, which is absolutely now properly lacking to the first resurrection.
The first resurrection was referring to the first and only?
Well, in this context, I'm referring to the first resurrection in the book of Revelation.
Which we haven't gotten to.
Which we haven't gotten to, but which I jumped ahead in order to fill it in. You ask an interesting question, which I don't know whether I've actually thought it through, whether I would say that the resurrection of the last day is properly lacking to the resurrection of Jesus, which we've elsewhere said on this handout, and last week we emphasized it, especially in response to Zarina's question. You raise it, in my mind, I don't know whether you intend, I guess you did intend it, you raised the question whether or not the final resurrection is properly lacking to the resurrection of Jesus. In some sense it is, but it seems to me, I'm just off the top of my head, that sense would have to be refined because of the absolutely unique nature of Jesus' resurrection. But I think in some sense it would have to be properly lacking to it, else it would have occurred, if I can put it that way.
Before or after?
Well, yeah. It must occur in some sense after. We're into a problem here now. We're beyond X, okay? So when we talk about after, we've got that problem that we're distinguishing two things in the now, the kairos, if you want, in New Testament terms, of the resurrection of Jesus, in that there is lacking to that the resurrection on the last day. Is it properly lacking to it? The answer is yes. So I think I've maybe answered the question which I was hesitating to answer, in effect. Does that answer your question? Okay.
At least in this context.
Yeah, okay. Todd?
On that topic then,
right.
You actually say in here in that paragraph that you just read, or the sentence you just read, about the not yet. Neither of these resurrections is the resurrection of the last day, which is not yet. You use that phrase not yet in a technical way.
I am. In fact, it's not fair. I'm cheating.
Okay.
Technically, it's quite fair, but it's not fair. The not yet is actually repeated, although you don't notice it right away unless you're really thinking about it, in the absolutely now that comes in the next clause of that sentence. Because not yet, if you go back to the, what is now the first back note, I think, to Beyond Sovereignty, the one in which we did all the ends, not yet is effectively defined there as absolutely now.
Okay.
So I'm taking advantage of that for the sake of our being able to think that distinction. I'm just repeating it, but instead of saying absolutely now, I'm saying not yet, absolutely now, in order to enable us to handle it, so to speak. Is that okay? Does that make any sense?
Well,
yeah.
When you were talking to Valchon here about, in being beyond X, and speaking of this beyond X,
yes.
I was wondering then, it's not a before or after, and the not yet, but the not yet still seems like it's pointing to something that's going to come.
Well, it's
absolutely now.
The problem is you can apply a before and after. I think it's almost unavoidable in some sense to use certainly the term after here is referring to this final resurrection. In some sense is after, you say, but it's not after, but that's the whole point. It's not after in a beyond X type way. You say, so what does after mean when you're not allowing for the distance either spatially or temporally that we I don't want to say instinctively, but certainly habitually associate with the term after or before and after.
Yeah. No, I get it, but there's something there that I'm wanting more, but that's okay. I mean,
all right,
I think I've gone as far as I can right now.
All right, okay. So when you've gone further, come back.
Okay.
But remember, if you go further, just don't cross any.
Don't go any farther.
Right. Any other questions, comments for openers? Okay, if there are none, we'll take advantage of the temporary silence to...
I just make a very short comment,
Okay.
which is then very simple and ordinary, and that is that I found myself moved to tears when I read it. Mary said, "You see before you the Lord's servant, let it happen to me as you have said." I mean, it's the most amazing thing.
Okay.
Imagine this. How, it's like... In a few lines here, this story of, the most, imagine this poor woman and instantly taking the whole thing. Being God's servant.
Right. In the Greek, doule, it's the same, it's that word that comes up in a lot of these parables, but not only in Luke, but I think also in Matthew is the same term for the servants. The Greek is doulos, masculine, doule, feminine.
Right. So
she defines herself as, I don't know how it's translated in this particular translation. What does it say? Servant? What line is it? Do you know?
Last line under the Annunciation.
Oh yes. So we're on page 16. Did you understand Nancy's question, Sarah?
Comment.
Yes, but I could tell she was talking about the Magnificat or where?
The Annunciation on page 1687, which would get us into the text of Luke. Fortunately, on 1687, in what she was commenting on was the last verse under the subtitle "The Annunciation." You see before you the Lord's servant, and I was saying, doule, servant. This is a modern way. This is a politically correct way of translating. It's slave. Okay, it's a servant, yes, but in the ancient world, if you were a servant, you were a slave. That's why you were a servant. Otherwise, you would.
Same word for midwife?
Huh?
Midwife.
This I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
It is.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of that, but okay.
Yeah.
That's, so she's saying, yes, the Lord's servant, the Lord's slave, if you want, or oftentimes I think traditionally is translated, which you can do because you bring out the feminine quality of it, the bondmaid or the handmaid. Understand that the handmaid or the bondmaid is just the feminine, it's the role that the feminine slave would, not always, but often be performing, right? Okay. Now, your comment was that it moved you to tears.
It's just really...
Well, I think that's...
Surrender. Let it
Yes.
happen to me, as you've said. I mean, this absolutely incomprehensible thing,
True enough. And not only a woman, but also a young woman, presumably.
Yeah.
So it must have been a real shocker. But now this is the ground. You're touching on the ground for the traditional notion. I say traditional now. I'm just setting aside those forms, which are not all forms of Protestantism. Right? In other words, there are some Protestant denominations that do not that reserve, at least theoretically, if not practically, a special place for Mary among creatures. Right? That's Luther had a great devotion, for example, to the Virgin Mary, and I think it's also true of Calvin. Right? So what's the word for it? The discomfort of Protestantism with the role of Mary only develops gradually in the modern period. And I think it's reinforced by Protestantism's function by definition is to separate itself from the Roman Catholic Church. I'm really fascinated with this idea of the Roman Catholic Church, you see. So what I'm getting at is but her special place theologically, which is a 2,000-year-old understanding in Christianity, certainly in Western Catholic Christianity, I prefer that term, and Eastern Orthodox and Catholic Christianity, there's a universal agreement that she's a special creature. And you're putting your finger on it because if you look at it as you did, and that's what brought you to tears, if you take it straight on, then it's not inconceivable at all. In fact, it leads you right away to think that, well, wait a minute, she must have been already prepared in some fundamental sense to be that open, right? If you imagine all the difficulties that this pregnancy was going to cause, not only personally with Joseph, but just in the neighborhood, okay, and in a culture which was, by the way, was not 20th or 21st century modern secularized culture. All right, and this was a real problem, and she accepts it like it was not a problem. Okay. Because she is, so the dogma goes, she is from her conception the servant of God in a way in which no other human being other than the divine person who assumed human nature, Jesus, is or was. All right? So that's, so the really, I'm almost tempted to say here, the unbelievable nature of her reaction, you see, requires you to understand that in faith she is a special creature. In my language in Novitas Mundi, the exception in essence, which I was distinguishing from, that's another problem, but that's the point of contact here. So as an essential person, to use the language of the thinking now occurring, she is an exception to the state of all other essential persons subsequent to the fall, if I blend the New Testament and the thinking now occurring into one sentence. All right. And also, and again, I haven't really thought this through in any detail, although I alluded to it, I think, in my discussion last time in answer to Rena's question about where did the resurrection of Jesus fit into the notion that I was articulating in that handout, that resurrections such as the resurrection of the holy, the bodies of the holy at the crucifixion, and the resurrection alluded to in Revelation 20, that those resurrections ought to be distinguished from the final resurrection on the last day. Zarina's question, well, wait a minute, how does the resurrection of Jesus fit in? Because when he is resurrected, the world has not come to an end. And my answer on the handout, and zeroing in on the using the quotation from Thomas to articulate it in Thomistic terms, is that the Word is there in the grave, in the tomb, with the dead body. I don't know whether I fully articulated that. I think you got it right away. But the fuller implication of that, I wasn't clear that I had actually spun it out a little more, right? If the Word is there and the body of Jesus is dead, then in some sense, qua Word, you see, he is both before and after the world. So effectively, vis-a-vis the dead body in the tomb, because it's the dead body of the dead body that was assumed, in the words assuming humanity, that in this, again, not temporal sense, in this ontological sense, you see, that dead body is able to be resurrected because vis-a-vis the Word, which is the person whose body it is, dead or alive, the world is effectively ended. Do you see what I'm saying? There's a whole thing there. There's a whole thing there, which we worth going into, but I don't want to try and get into that because it's going to take me away from getting through the text, all right? But if you think about it, there's a whole thing there as to not only how these, what I characterize therefore as spiritually real resurrections, to be related to the ultimately literal, historically real resurrection at the end of the world, but it raises all kinds of interesting questions. I can't, to be honest, they're not terribly interesting to me, or I guess I would have pursued it by now. But I can imagine for other people, they're very interesting questions about, all the details of how you work out who's doing what between now and the end of the world, right? But the essence of it, I think we got the essence of it, and that's, at the moment, I'm content with that. But I'm open, again, to questions as we go along. Okay. Well, I think, by the way, let me stop there. That was a comment. Okay. So we finished with comments, questions. Okay, so back into the text there is as good a place as any to start. Just a little before that, in that Annunciation paragraph on 1687, pardon me, when the angel Gabriel speaks to her, he says to her in the third line of that paragraph, verse 28, he went in and said to her, "Rejoice, you who enjoy God's favor." The editors tell you that the traditional translation, of course, is hail. Right? If you put the elements of this passage together with the elements taken from Elizabeth's greeting to her on the next page, when she goes to see her cousin Elizabeth, whom she has just found out from the angel is 6 months pregnant, I think. Between those two, you get the Hail Mary, the famous Hail Mary. Some of you who don't know the Hail Mary, you've heard of it through your interest in Major League Football, right? The Hail Mary pass. Well, that's what they're referring to, right? So the traditional prayer, the Hail Mary, is a composite of the elements from the Gabriel's speaking to Mary and Elizabeth speaking to her shortly thereafter. What I was starting to say was, however, the editors translate the Greek as rejoice. They think that's a more accurate translation, and it ties in with he's there to bring her, you might say, in a very personal way, the good news. Okay. And so what I wanted to say further, and then she is most favored, right? You who enjoy God's favor. The Greek is highly favored, would be a fuller translation of it. Speaking of Eastern and Western Catholic churches, I have a good friend who is a Greek, not a Greek Catholic, but a Greek Orthodox person, who made the comment to me one day on the phone some months back. Just give you some idea of kind of interesting kinds of conversations I have for no particular good reason. I don't know what we were talking about, but somehow or other we were talking about the thinking now occurring, that was for sure. And when I zeroed his mind in on the box 4 on the Ethic of Simplicity, which is the omnipotence box, the creation box, the gratitude box, which, by the way, I've tried to emphasize recently in this context, that relationship of creator and creature there is somehow or other, I was fumbling for terms. I'm not too hung up on the terms, either a reciprocal or mutual relationship. In other words, it's a two-way street. I think I brought this out last time. It was already there in my answer to Nancy about prayer. I brought up the Eucharisteo, the Greek the verb to give thanks, which is the Eucharist verb. In Greek, it doesn't mean simply to give thanks. It literally means, depending on the context, to return thanks, right? And what I'm saying is, remember I'm saying the fundamental structure you want to get here is that there's no such thing as a one-way street. Well, that can be said in a thoroughgoing way. And that's the whole point of the thinking now occurring. See, that when God creates the world, you would think off the bat, especially, here's the point, especially because Christianity insists that the creation of the world by the Creator is ex nihilo. Do you see? You'd be very tempted to think, well, gee, if it's ex nihilo, it really ought to be a one-way street, right? Because there's nothing there to, do you see what I'm saying? Again, it's not a paradox, right? But if you're self-conscious about it, what appears at first blush is a paradox. It's precisely the creation ex nihilo. It's precisely a work of omnipotence to create something really other that is able, to be thanked, right? That is, or to put it in a more constructive way, which is also in box 4, to be loved, that in the sense of the way in which God loves the world. So it's not that. Thomas helps. See, the 13th century remains relevant in some sense, right? I think I pointed out to you in a totally different context, I believe, that Thomas makes the distinction between the divine knowing and human knowing is that when God knows something, what he knows, assuming we're talking about something other than God, a creature, when God knows the creature, it's God's knowing that brings that creature into existence. Whereas when I, a human being, know something, Thomas says, that presupposes, I don't know whether he would use the term pre-existence, but it presupposes that there's something there existing for me to come to know. Do you say? The object is there before, at least ontologically, it's prior to my being able to know it. That's Thomas's point. Whereas in the case of God, says Thomas, that's not the case. There's no creature that exists prior to the divine knowing. And what I want to do is I just want to wrap that up one level and say there's no creation that exists ontologically independent of the divine love. So the love that I'm attributing to omnipotence in box 4D, you see, is creative love. And it's omnipotent because it is able to love something, you see, where the loving of something and its being ex nihilo, existing ex nihilo, are not able to be distinguished. You see? Now, what was all that about? It had something to do with Mary. So my discussion with my Greek Orthodox friend, I was zeroing him in on this box 4, the omnipotence idea, and the other. I got a lot of stuff in these boxes. You know, it's kind of a practical illustration that they're really not boxes. If you can keep adding stuff and the box doesn't get any bigger, it's probably an illusion that there's a box there. In that box, I also have the notion of productive receptivity, and what I think is right it's relevant here. You see, when I zeroed him on, we weren't talking about anything that we're now talking about in this text at this very moment. You see, I was just talking to him about the thing now occurring, and he was very interested in the ethic of simplicity because he's a guy who teaches graduate students in management, in business. And he's convinced for many years, independent of the thing now occurring, that if you want to know the liberal arts, don't go to a liberal arts college. That the liberal arts, the Latin, see, it's really interesting. The Latin, you get a Bachelor of Artium or a Master of Arts. To say, so the arts, the liberal arts, is not fine art. It may, depending on the context, it may include a fine art or two, but it's art, which would include craftsmanship. It's how to do things, how to make things, poieo, you see. So my friend, for many years, this is his shtick, okay? He goes around, people actually bring him to their universities to lecture their business schools on this point, that if you're really interested in the liberal arts, really where you want to be is in the business school. Because it's the businessmen who, at least in principle, are going to be doing things, right? And they're going to need to be, in that ancient sense of the word, artists, right? Makers and doers. I'm getting a little bit off the point, but that's why he was interested in the ethic of simplicity, because he thinks it's a very nifty little thing which you can take out of Leahy's esoteric otherworldliness and apply it on the ground, you see, in a business, in a leadership course, for example, which he does. Okay. What was all that about? Well, we're talking about this. That's why I was on the phone with him. And I pointed him to box 4D, which is the first box going 4, 1, 2, 3, and I called his attention to the productive receptivity, and they immediately said, I don't know whether he mentioned Mary, but he certainly said that sounded like something that would relate to a woman, right? The woman as the receiver of the seed and the bearer of the child, right? Now that receptivity is productive. It's inherent in that receiving is the producing, although in today's world it appears to be debatable. Okay, but naturally speaking, if I can put it that way, it's inherent. The reception is inseparable from, and it is just a stage in the production. All right. So what I'm going to say is that what Nancy notes in her own reading of the text, that unbelievable receptivity, you see, of Mary to the message coming out of the blue, that incredible receptivity, it perfectly corresponds to the incredible nature, if I can put it that way, of the child that she's going to give birth to. Right? So it's all of a piece. It's all of a piece. It's neat in that sense. All right. The Benedictus, Zechariah prophesying on the bottom of page 1688. I don't think we need to read through it all, but I pointed out in response to ahead of time in one of my responses to Voltaut's question about salvation, And I said my first response is salvation is health, wholeness, completeness, you see. But as this passage indicates, it's also, and as the thinking now occurring is very, very clear on, salvation is also freedom. It's also liberation, you see. And Zechariah, who is thinking here at the beginning, so to speak, of the incarnation, he's thinking very much in terms of salvation from our enemies there in verse 71 near the bottom of page 1688, and again from our enemies in verse 74 over on the next page. And then that's wrapped in together in verse 77 to give his people knowledge of salvation through the forgiveness of their sins. All right, so in other words, the salvation from one's enemies and the salvation from sin, which takes the form of being forgiven one's sins. In this context, they are different aspects of the same reality. I think the way I put it to Baltrout last time, anticipating this passage, was that the ultimate enemy, you might say the spiritual enemy in the context of the New Testament, of which all the other enemies of Israel would be types. The ultimate enemy, of course, is Satan, is the devil, is the evil one, as it said at the end of what we call the Our Father or the Lord's Prayer in Matthew. All right. And so zeroing in on verse 77 on 1689, to give his people the knowledge of salvation through the forgiveness of their sins because of the faithful love of our God. And again, see, you should be reading this only in Greek, Nancy, because since you're prone to tears, this would bring you to tears, because faithful love is kind of sanitized version, translation. It's, again, in the Greek, it's splagna ekleona. It's the bowels, right? It's the bowels of mercy. So God, you're feeling the emotional power of the text. What the text is telling you is that God saves his creatures, in this case for Zechariah, in the first case the Jews, but then in the context of Luke, the Jews, and through the Jews humanity, through sending the Messiah. God has that feeling in his gut. Literally, that's what the text is saying, is it? Out of the love that's coming from his gut. God, right? That's how much God loves you. So the thinking now occurring doesn't quite do justice to that, although I was reminded of a question asked by Zarina in the questions class last spring when she asked the question just in a purely intellectual way outside of this context, whether or not, I don't know how you phrased the question, but the question basically was, what is the relationship between thinking and feeling in the thinking now occurring? And I was able to give a quick and unequivocal answer that there's no real difference between them. I mean, there is a difference. There's a distinction to be made between feeling and thinking, but it's not a difference such that feeling is something less than thinking. Feeling is a form of thinking in the thinking now occurring, all right? So what I'm getting at is, even though we don't normally stress it, the fact that the text can speak of God loving from his gut, right? His mercy comes from the love that he feels for his creature from his guts, is certainly compatible with thinking now occurring, but it's emphasized here in a way that I normally wouldn't have the occasion to emphasize. Okay. So because of the love that God feels for us in his gut, we might say, in which the rising sun has come from on high to visit us, to give light to those who live in darkness, and the shadow of dark is death, and to guide our feet and the way into peace. I'm just going to jump ahead just half a second. Just think now of the father in the Samaritan, the prodigal son thing, which is again is peculiar to Luke. I said Luke is kind of a lover. Now I have to be careful. Luke is not so much of a lover that he forgets what it means to go to hell. Okay, but he stresses that when the prodigal son is returning after he's finally come to his senses, if you read the text carefully, and again it's another good thing. I got a lot of suggestions for Mr. Gibson there, right? A lot of good film scenes, right? It's not that the father sees the son coming over the horizon, right? And he's a long way off, right? It's a long way off, so he goes in, finish making his cup of coffee and waits for him on the porch Right? When he sees the sun, he runs toward the sun, you see. So there's no limit, as one of the translations of Matthew that we read before, there are no bounds to the love of God for the creature. And that little way in which the Father reacts to the prodigal son is an indication of that. There's no reserve. Right? I might wait on the porch myself personally, you know what I mean? That son of a bitch. It's about time you got back to say. But in the case of the Father, he's a fool. He's not reserved at all in his love for his son, and it's, put it simply, it's unconditional. But I'm jumping ahead. Okay, but it's all of a piece is what I'm trying to get at. So, for example, when she visits Elizabeth, which I skipped, but if you just go over to the page 688, in the middle there, that little 3-line middle paragraph on that page, the time came for Elizabeth to have her child, and she gave birth to a son. That's John the Baptist, of course. And when her neighbors and relations heard that the Lord had ravished on her his, again, faithful love, it's the same thing. They shared her joy. Now, I'm stressing the love from the gut. But what I want to also bring in there is that the Greek there, the gut. The Greek is this eleos, which is the Greek word for mercy. Right? So again, go back to the omnipotence thing. That's the box of mercy, divine love, creative love. So the creation of the world and the love of the world and the act of mercy, all of these are different ways of talking about the identical reality, right? Which is the foundational reality of everything. Maybe that's, no, I've never met her, but maybe that's what you're picking up from Miss Roberts there, right? Is it Roberta? Am I doing it? Bernadette, right? What Alan was referring to, that total unqualified dedication to whatever she's doing. I'm in no position to judge her one way or the other, but I'm just saying, to the extent to which you saw in that person a kind of absolute dedication, what I'm saying is that if you look into the thinking now occurring, you can certainly see the ground for that, right? In fact, the real thing we all have to suffer through is that there's no ground for anything short of that. You know, so that's the point. Yeah, Nancy. Yep.
Can you just say that last sentence again? There's no
if you imagine that someone is absolutely given over to a response, let's say in terms of the text, to get it off Bernadette's shoulders, if you had an absolutely uncompromising response to the divine mercy, which comes from God's very guts, right? Unreserved love. If you had the proper response to that, what did I say that Sarah wants to repeat? I would say there's no ground for anything short of that, right? I think that's what I was saying. Is that right? For anything short of that, there's no grounds exist. If you start with either the text or the thinking now occurring. What were you going to say, Nancy?
I was just wondering about the word mercy.
Yes.
Could you just say something about it? I mean, so mercy, so I'm about to be executed, and
then
mercy there.
You could get mercy. You could be pardoned or something like that.
Yeah. It's a big Sufi term, also about creation, the mercy.
Well,
I just can't. It's not ringing.
I'm not sure what is causing the question exactly, so it's hard for me to answer it, but I'll make a stab at it.
Yeah. What is God's mercy?
Now I'm thinking of Shakespeare. What does he say? The quality of mercy is not strained, says Shakespeare. Portia. Remember Portia? What's the play? The Merchant of Venice. Portia is the lawyer. I'm going to start telling you the story of the Merchant of Venice. I just can't contain myself. But Portia has a little speech in which she speaks, she has a nice, beautiful speech on mercy. And the quality of mercy is not strained, it droppeth from the heavens as a gentle rain. And then she goes on, which I can't repeat the rest of it. All right. So there's something, starting with Shakespeare, there's something easy, free, unconditioned about mercy. I would say I would approximate with the notion in more traditional Christian language as it develops over 2,000 years, the notion of grace, although we've lost the feel for that. It's favor. When Gabriel speaks to Mary, he says, "You are most favored of the Lord." You see? So there's a certain favor. To receive mercy is to get something that I don't deserve. Yes, that's true. If I'm guilty and I'm pardoned, I've been shown mercy, right? But I guess what I want to say is, especially you go back to the ex nihilo, creation ex nihilo idea, you don't have to be guilty to receive mercy. You say you don't have. So I can give you a gift that you don't deserve, but it doesn't have to be letting you walk from some punishment. You see what I'm saying? It's just free love displayed toward someone. That would be my answer, minus a more particular context. Okay. And let's see. I better get my little piece of paper here so we don't get too lost. In Luke 2:29. Is that right? 2:29. Why can't I find it?
1690. The nunc dimittis. Now, Master.
Yeah. No, wait a minute. Okay. I got it. I was looking for something else. So yes, on page 1690, toward the bottom, nunc dimittis, now you can dismiss me, is the idea. Now, Master, you are letting your servant go in peace, as you promised. For my eyes have seen the salvation which you have made ready in the sight of the nations. Notice right away it's not exclusive to Luke, don't misunderstand me, but it's emphatic in Luke, right? This universalizing of the message. He's not doing it for the first time. It's already there in Matthew and so forth. The end of Matthew is go and teach all nations, right? So it's not, but it's more to the fore in Luke because we understand Luke to be himself a Gentile convert. So even the Messiah showing up for the Jews is going to happen in the sight of the nations. Light of revelation for the Gentiles, there you go, and glory for your people Israel. So it's not an either or. They go hand in hand, as it were. As the child's father and mother were wondering at the things that were being said about him, Simeon blessed them and said to Mary, his mother, "Look, he is destined for the fall and for the rise of many in Israel." And that's the harder edge of Luke, all right? So I just don't want to make Luke out to be some sort of marshmallow, okay? He's big on love, he's big on mercy, he's big on forgiveness, right? But you can be, we'll get to that again, I'm jumping ahead, my mind is jumping ahead on me. We can get even to Luke's fig tree, and the fig tree in Luke is going to be spared this year. We'll do a little manure, a little watering, and so forth and so on. But, Master, if that doesn't work, and you come back next year, okay, then you can cut it down, okay? So there is ultimately a judgment, but Luke is emphasizing the second chance, if I can put it that way, right? That one gets, mercifully gets the second chance. He is destined to be the fall and rise of many in Israel, destined to be a sign that is opposed, and a sword will pierce your soul too, speaking to Mary, so that the secret thoughts of many may be laid bare. And what I wanted to focus in on this passage is, again, it's a little bit lost in translation. But if you go back up to the nunc dimittis in verse 32, a light of revelation for the Gentiles, that's a phos eis apocalypsis ethnon. So, in other words, the revelation there is our nice, what is now a good English word, especially in our day, because we're living in an apocalyptic time. And even Tom, that's one thing Altizer and I could agree on. That this is an apocalypse. So the question is is it the death of God, or is it the beginning of the resurrection? Those are two different ways of understanding the apocalypse. But nevertheless, so what we're talking about in the New Testament is here's an apocalypse, right? This is a light of an apocalyptic light, if I can splice it, for the Gentiles. But then notice he goes on to say in that at the very bottom of that page. This child is destined to be for the fall and rise of many in Israel after the parenthesis after the lines, so that the secret thoughts of many may be laid bare, right? And again, that's apocalypsosin. Again, remember, this is a rule of thumb. Once you've got the rule, you're home free, right? If there's an apocalypse, if I enlighten you, there's going to be it's not a one-way street. When I reveal something to you, it's going to reveal who you are. So stay out of the light unless you're prepared for it. Now it's neatly put here by Luke. But so here we have the light of the apocalypse, and it's going to be an apocalyptic revelation, as it were, of the hearts of many in Israel to begin with, and in mankind to end with. All right. Then we have that nice little scene, the lost child. Jesus is lost among the doctors of the law, over on page 1691. When it takes them a while to realize he's not there. Again, another world. It's a world we don't live in, at least here in the West. Right? They don't miss him because they got 150 relatives have just made this trip with them. You see what I mean? So he's with somebody, but we all know each other, right? So we're not worried about him, right? But after a while, after a couple of days, well, exactly where is he? Okay. So then they track him down. He's back at the temple, and his response. Now he can get away with this as a child. They say to him, "Why have you done this to us?" Toward the bottom of that. Two paragraphs in the middle of 1691. "See how worried your father and I have been," Mary says, "looking for you." He replied, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he meant. And the footnote says, in either case, Jesus affirms in Joseph's presence that God is his father. And claims a relationship to him, that is God, which surpasses human family ties. This is the first manifestation of his consciousness of being the Son. And when I read this passage again, I thought of Alan's original question about did Jesus know that he was God? So putting it more concretely, did he know that his father was God in the sense in which Joseph was not his father? Yes, he does know that at the age of 12. Did he have to think about it? Did he have to reflect upon it? I would say no. It just immediately, it's clear to him. In fact, the immediacy of his sense that he was about his father's business is part and parcel of his being a little bit perplexed as to what they're all. Why isn't it clear to you what I'm doing? In other words, I'm about my father's business. I mean, don't you know that? Don't you know who I am? Maybe I don't want to take it too far, but it's in that direction. All right. Then we have the proclamation of John the Baptist over on page 1692. I just note something which I want to emphasize. Again, Jesus chewing out the Pharisees here. Let's see. Oh no, this is more general. All right, it's good. Get the Pharisees off the hook for a change. But this is the kind of thing he would typically say to the Pharisees. On chapter 3, verse 7, I guess this is immediately upon being baptized. In verse 7, he said, the text says, he said, therefore, to the crowds who came to be baptized. Wait a minute. I want to make sure I've got the right. Who's talking to who here?
That's John talking.
Yeah, that's John talking. That's right. But this is the point. He said, therefore, to the crowds who came to be baptized by him, brood of viper. Oh, okay, so Jesus says this to the Pharisees. John is saying this to the people in general. Brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the coming retribution? Here's what I want to emphasize. Produce fruit in keeping with repentance, and do not start telling yourselves, we have Abraham as our father, etc. And at the end of that paragraph, yes, even now the axe is being laid to the root of the trees, so that any tree failing to produce good fruit will be cut down and thrown on the fire. So this is the recurring theme here in the mouth of John, addressed to all of the people. But the bottom line is produce fruit, right? Do the will of the Father, in the language that's frequent in the mouth of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, or it's a box 3 kind of thing, okay? And you'll notice that on page 1 of the first handout, I put Luke in. You didn't ask me. You asked me about why I put Mark 1 but Luke is 3, and what's in box 3? Box 3 is the Platonic box of the Platonic rulers. The rulers. We're going to see, if you've read the text for today, you get the reward for investing your talents properly. Is not just that you'll be welcomed into the joy of your Father, which is kind of a general statement in Matthew, to say, and Mark, but in Luke, I gave you 5, you gave me 5 back. I put you in charge of 5 cities. I gave you 10, you give me 10 back. Okay, now you're in charge. You're the ruler over 10 cities, you see. So Luke brings out that ruling aspect, which is a function of what? Of bearing fruit, right? Of doing, of properly investing and producing a yield, you see, on the mercy, the gift that the master has given you. And if you do that, then you wind up in the position of the ruler. You wind up in box 3. You're doing the right thing. But doing the right thing and ruling is, again, I'm jumping ahead. I can't help myself. In one of those little parables is going to be feeding the members of the household. Right? That servant who is wise enough to be doing what he's supposed to be doing when his master returns. He's an oikonomos, by the way. He's a house manager called steward in this text. And what is his primary job? It's to take care of the household, meaning concretely to provide the right rations and food for everybody in the house. Okay. So I'm thinking, who is it? Jesus says to Peter, remember he gives him a hard time about having betrayed him 3 times? I'm reading into the text. He says, having been betrayed 3 times after his resurrection, he says, do you love me, Peter? He says, yeah, I love you. Do you love me? Yeah, I love you. I just told you I love you. Do you love me? Each time he says to him, feed my sheep, feed my sheep, feed my lambs. I think that's the way it goes, right? So this idea, it goes back to the Eucharistic idea. Men, no such thing as a one-way street. If you're getting fed, you got to be feeding. To say? And you say, well, wait a minute. It looks like, well, in one sense, it's going down I want to say the food chain. Yeah, there's a food chain here if you want. But this is a food chain made of links that aren't connected to one another. So going down the food chain, in other words, when I get fed by my consumption of the body and blood of Jesus, I am to feed his flock over which he has put me. In the meantime, if I'm one of the apostles or one of the guys they've laid hands on, I'm to feed the flock over which he has put me in charge. You see? Well, I'm to feed them. But I was going to say, well, it looks like I'm going down the food chain, but again, in an unlinked chain, on an unconnected free links, those that I'm feeding, those little ones, are the Jesus Christ who is going to judge me by my own deeds now on the day of judgment, right? In other words, what you did to the least of these, you did to me, and what you didn't do to the least of these, you didn't do to me. Right? So really, it's not, again, that's why we can hardly avoid up and down, we can hardly avoid before and after, but every time you say up and down the food chain, or before and after the resurrection, you've got to suck out of that notion any distance, any beyond X-ness to the relationship, you see. So, yes, these little ones are smaller than the big guy in a beyond X kind of way, you see. But if there's no beyond X that operates here, then these little ones are the big guy. Or in the more abstract language of thinking now occurring, which happily was developed without any specific reference to the text, part and whole. Right? The part and the whole are not, in the thinking now occurring, logically able to be set in opposition to one another. All right. Jesus is baptized. The ancestry, I think I already pointed out to you, the ancestry of Jesus on 1693, Mark distinguished from Matthew insofar as he takes him back, in a couple of ways, but the one I'm interested in is he takes him back to Adam. Right? So in that sense, emphasizing the universality. Then we have Luke's version of the testing in the desert. And he reverses. It interests me, but I'm not going to dwell on it. But I call it to your attention in case you didn't notice it. First of all, he gives a very short. He does this a couple of times. I think the editors point out to you that Luke drew heavily on both Mark and Matthew when he was putting together his own gospel. So I think he just wants to get what he considers to be the essence of this, and they've already given him more. Certainly Matthew has given a very elaborate presentation of this and the Beatitudes and so forth. So in Luke we get a kind of condensed version emphasizing what Luke wants to emphasize. But that said, in the temptations in the desert, they're essentially the same as we find in Matthew, except that the order of the two, the second and the third, is reversed in Luke. All right? And as I pointed out to you, and this is a really inside baseball comment, but I just make it for what it's worth for future reference. When we were going through the logic, as it were, we were forced to do many courses on the thinking now occurring. I pointed out to you that there's a irreducible identification of 2 and 3 in the thinking now occurring. So that flip-flop probably is something we could explore in another context. I don't want to explore it now, but I'm just saying it's probably not incidental and not simply an accident to note it. All right. And then again on that same page, 1494, in verse 24, the idea that I stressed last time in Matthew, in truth I tell you, no prophet is ever accepted in his own country, and the relevance of it being that miracles, Jesus cannot work miracles where there is no faith, where there is no receptivity, you see. So it's not only my receptivity must be productive, but I can't be productive vis-a-vis someone. Right? In other words, my lack of receptivity not only keeps me from producing, and here you get the absolute witness of the thinking now occurring, you see, it not only keeps me from being productive, but my lack of receptivity in keeping me from being productive is indistinguishably going to be keeping others from being productive, you see. Okay. Then the disciples are called with their usual aplomb. They just get up and go. Again, the readiness, you see. See, the difference between them and Mary is that they have a readiness. Mary had a readiness, right? But she had a problem. When they get called, they're ready, but they don't have a problem. Would they have been as ready if they were being told they were about to give birth? Maybe not. Of course, they're all guys, so they're off the hook on that one. All right, then we have, let's see, I want to get to, the Beatitudes again are on page 1698. We have a shorter version. They're also, you could say, more concrete. The difference, for example, hits you right in the first one. How blessed are you who are poor, the kingdom of God is yours, on 1698. Whereas in Matthew, how blessed or blessed are the poor in spirit. So Matthew brings to the fore that notion of spirit. You could understand it in Luke, you see, but since he doesn't make it explicit, your mind is first taken to what? to what we call the actual poor. That is, the poor who are, in a pedestrian sense of the word, who are suffering for the poor that would be in the Judgment Day roll call, the hungry, the thirsty, the imprisoned, and so forth, who are in that. See, we got to do something. We have to write a whole new dictionary. This is getting really tough. I was going to say who are in the literal sense poor, but I mean literal in the pedestrian sense. I don't mean in the thinking now sense, oratory sense. Okay. All right. Then labeled integrity in our text, 1698. In the second line, verse 40, so that would be chapter 6, verse 40, the disciple is not superior to the teacher, but fully trained disciple will be like the teacher. And on the same line, along the same lines, on page 1699, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I say? Everyone who comes to me and listens to my words and acts on them, I will show you what such a person is like. Such a person is like a man who, when he built a house, dug and dug deep and laid the foundations on rock. And we have that as the margin indicates. We've already have that in Matthew. When the river wasn't flooded, it bore down on that house, and he could not shake it. It was so well built. And again, if you're in the mind to do so, you can take that. Everyone who comes to me and listens to my words and acts on them, you can do 0, 1, 1 right there, right? The one who comes to me, the readiness, listens to my words, right? The unum, the discretion, and 3, the unbolded one, acts on them. Whereas on the contrary, in the third line from the bottom of that paragraph, someone who listens and does nothing is like a man who built a house on soil with no foundations. So go back to one of the opening questions of today's class. To hear and not act, which in the context of the thinking now occurring beyond sovereignty, Appendix 3 on the question of evil, is to be improperly embodied in omnipotence. The one who does evil still exists, is still in some sense, speaking loosely, born up by, sustained by, in existence by omnipotence, you see, but is not properly grounded or founded in that omnipotence. So in a certain sense, you can hear the words, you see. You can hear, you can read, you can hear the words. You don't discrete them. I've invented this word for English now. You don't discrete them as the words of the incarnate Word. We'll give you the benefit of the doubt here. You might, but you don't, presumably, and then you don't act on them. Okay? The reason I hesitated there is such a thing as malice. It's possible that one could understand, one could get as far as discretion, as it were, and still not act, right? Which would be, I think that would be the sin against the Spirit. Yeah, it would have to be. Yeah, that fits, right? Because the Spirit is in box 2D, the discretion box, the science box, what does he call them? Plato, the guardians, the guardians box. If you got to understand that these are the words of God being spoken to you, and did not act on them, then you would be committing sin against the Spirit, and that would be the one, as Jesus says elsewhere, the one unforgivable, unforgivable sin. All right. Along those lines, on page 1700, in verse 29 and following, all the people who heard him and the tax collectors too acknowledged God's saving justice by accepting baptism from John, but by refusing baptism from him, the Pharisees and the lawyers thwarted God's plan for them. And that's another subtle point here that's worth highlighting, okay? In other words, first of all, I don't like the, as you can, if you read Beyond Sovereignty, you would understand that we have to call into question the notion of plan here. Now, by the way, I have to be very careful. It's a good thing I only do this in private. I mean, I'm not doing this on television. I'll be in big trouble. Because we have 2,000 years of pious belief that God plans. You see? There's a cardinal running around. Well, there are quite a few of them, but this one you've heard his name, Schoenberg. Cardinal Schoenberg was the deputy to the then Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger. And between the two of them, Ratzinger was the head man. Schoenberg was, Ratzinger was the CEO, and Schoenberg was the COO, the Chief Operating Officer. In what capacity? In putting together the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And Schoenberg apparently became famous or infamous within the last couple of years. Somewhere along the line, he wrote an op-ed piece for the New York Times. Are you familiar with this at all? Okay. And I didn't read it, so this is secondhand. This part is secondhand. But he was addressing on the op-ed page of the New York Times, Schoenberg was, the whole question of creationism and intelligent design and so forth and so on. Whatever he said, you can imagine it was misconstrued, I'm sure, right? I mean, to say anything intellectually significant in the public arena today is at least dangerous. So I don't know what he said. Anyway, it became very controversial, as you can imagine.
I remember that.
Yeah, it became controversial because he must have said something. Even if he was criticizing creationism, he was still had some reservations about how evolution had to be properly understood and so forth. This kind of thing. Okay. He has a new book out. I only know this because I watch these book programs on C-SPAN. See, that's how I know this stuff. And now, what was I going to say? Oh, so he's on there. I saw him twice over the last weekend or whatever. Somehow in the last week I saw him twice, two different programs. But he was being interviewed on some program I was watching, and then he was giving a talk on another program. But the content was basically the same, and here's why I said it's a good thing this is just between you. I'm friend new. Okay. Because Schoenberg's out there talking about, of course, the divine plan, right? And there was a Jesuit. This gets very complicated, but it's all relevant. It's all relevant. See? There was, up until recently, I didn't know this guy had lost his job, but I found it very interesting. Up until the last year or so, the head of the Vatican Observatory, despite the mythology, if you were to have a register of scientific discoveries in the last 500 years, among them will be many Jesuit names, many monks, religious, and so forth and so on. You would think that this would not be the case, but it's quite the case, right? Because there's a very intellectual tradition, certainly in the Catholic Church, which did not abandon reason with Luther, you see? Anyway, the point I'm making is that the head of the Vatican Observatory was a Jesuit who got himself involved in this whole question about creationism a couple of years back. And I did see this guy again on one of these, giving a talk somewhere, in which he was going full bore against the notion of, what is it called? Intelligent design, yeah. He wanted no part of that, right? Now, this Jesuit, and so I thought, well, he's true to the Jesuit tradition, thinking out of the box. But he was so far out of the box that he's very close to the thinking now occurring. I don't know that he's doing that, you know what I'm saying? But he actually went so far as to say, I forget how I didn't hear him say it when I saw him, but I heard Schoenberg attributing to him, and I assume the attribution is correct, although I'm sure it was taken out of context. Attributing to this, oh, by the way, now here's the little gossipy point, is that in the interval he was removed from his position as the head of the Vatican Observatory. But his intellectual position is that, which is akin to the thinking now occurring, according to Schoenberg now, second thing, was that, which Schoenberg was, this got to be wrong, right? The Jesuit's position was, I'm trying to, Coyne, I think was his name, something like that. was that God was so little into planning that he was surprised. Now there's a way in which you could, you understand? Everything depends on the context, but what was bothering Schoenberg with the way he heard it was that God was so little into planning that when man evolved, right, when he came on the scene, God was surprised. So Schoenberg wanted no part of that. Okay. So what I'm saying is that there is a traditional notion that divine providence means somehow or other means some kind of a plan. Okay. Now, if you read Beyond Sovereignty, you know the thing now occurring that goes out. That goes out. I don't think the baby goes out with that bathwater, but that bathwater goes out. Okay. I don't know what the Jesuit originally said when he said God was surprised. I don't know exactly what he meant. But in the thinking now occurring, I would say that omnipotence is in some ontological sense now, not necessarily in a psychological sense. I think that's where the confusion comes in, because I don't think everybody's doing ontology here. Ontologically, omnipotence is surprised if it sets free the creation in the very merciful, loving act of bringing it to be ex nihilo. Right? In other words, I love you. I ought to be. If I'm not, I ought to be surprised that you love me too. Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, if what kind of a situation would be in it that if my love required you to love me? Right? If it engineered your love of me, if it was a foregone conclusion, I think that would be oppressive. Okay, maybe that's part of the problem that we have in our human relations. You see? Okay, so that God loved the world perfectly in that sense, not in the psychological sense, that he's an idiot and didn't know what was coming or something like that. Not, in other words, not surprised as an alternative to being in control, but absolutely surprised in the context in which control never was nor ever could be the issue for omnipotence. Why would omnipotence be concerned about being in charge or being in control? Okay. Now, how did I get into that? Planning.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what, when you say they're thwarted God's plan?
Oh, yeah. Oh, thanks. What? Go ahead, ask the question.
Well, I just wondered what word they're translating there. Boulane, which in Greek,
it's one of these things where you could they do. You could translate it plan, but it has, you could translate it will, but in the modern world that's already dangerous. I would say disposition. And that's very compatible. I would say that would be the proper translation of the divine boule. The divine disposition would fit with the index of the ethic of simplicity, which is all about, if you look at those boxes, we're talking about dispositions. The gratitude in box 1 is the ethical disposition. Beneficence is, right, you see? And then we have the defective dispositions, the negatives of all of those things, you see? So I would say that when God creates the world, what you say, as providence, there's not a 1, 2, 3 step here, right? It's not a chronological event, but part and parcel, as it were, of the divine mercy is the disposition, to say, to save. I mean, it's already too many words for the one ultimate reality, you see. And so the point being, so the reason I zeroed in on this in my notations on the text is that yes, the Pharisees, and not just the Pharisees, everybody else is in the position of being able to, if not actually doing it, to thwart, to say, to frustrate. I almost want to say the divinely natural disposition, you see, to save the world, right? Okay. So can you refuse the divine law? Yes. Okay. Okay. And then the woman was sinner. This is the one I said last time. We didn't get to the text where I want to take issue with the editors. I mean, I don't really want to take issue with the editors, This is, again, it's a pedagogical ploy, right? To make a point. The point is that the story of the woman and the sinner, who was a sinner there at the bottom of page 1700, she comes in and waited behind him in 38, weeping. Her tears fell on his feet. She wiped them away with her hair. She covered his feet with kisses and anointed them with the ointment that she had brought in. A lot of costly ointment, okay? When the Pharisees who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who this woman is and what sort of person it is who is touching him and what a bad name she has. Then Jesus took him up and said, Simon, I have something to say to you. Say on, Master. There was once a creditor who had 2 men in his debt. One owed him 500 denarii, the other 50. They were unable to pay, so he let them both off. Which of them will love him more? Simon answered, the one who was let off more, I suppose. Jesus said, you are right. Then he turned to the woman and said to Simon, you see this woman, I came into your house and you poured no water over my feet, but she has poured out her tears over my feet and wiped them away with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but she has been covering my feet with kisses ever since I came in. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with ointment. For this reason I tell you that her sins, many as they are, have been forgiven her because she has shown such great love. It is someone who is forgiven little who shows little love. Then he said to her, your sins are forgiven. Those who were with him at table began to say to themselves, who is this man that even forgives sins? But he said to the woman, your faith has saved you, go in peace. So the ending is old hat, right? Your faith has saved you, go in peace. So we have put a 0 in the margin there. 0 for not nothing, okay? Faith, readiness, okay. But the editors say, because they're smart guys, they're smarty pants, right? So they say in the footnote there, footnote H at the bottom of page 1701, in the first part of this verse, love seems to be the cause of forgiveness. In the second, its effect, which you probably, if you're paying real close attention as you're reading, you would pick up that. If you go back and reread it, you'll see what they're talking about, right? The servants who are forgiven X number of denarii, you see, the one who's forgiven more than the other, he loves his master more, right? And Jesus says that's the right answer. If you're forgiven more, then you love more. But in the second half of this little story, it turns out that his language is, her sins at the top of 1701, as many as they are, have been forgiven because she has shown such great love. So it looks like love precedes forgiveness in one part of the story, and the other, forgiveness precedes love. So this might be the time. I think I must have skipped something. No, I didn't skip it. What am I doing? Okay, well, all right, let me get to this. Set it up. Oh, yeah. The first, I'm handing out the handout, Sarah, and even though there's something on the first page of the handout that we haven't gotten to yet, on the second page of the handout, because I'm really bringing this passage, which we're now doing here in chapter 7 about the woman who was a sinner, on the handout, on the second page of the handout, I relate it to what I will be doing. You see this problem about Beyond X? You see what a problem it is? Beyond X, you've got to turn the page over, right? I relate this passage to what I will be doing in chapter 16, which I've already done on page 1 of the handout. I can't help that. But since we're there, it turns out my word processor, my word processor, gives me these big bold arrows. I don't even ask for them. And so in the middle of page 2 of the handout, I say, note, and we'll come back to this in the other context later, note that to be forgiven the wastefulness of which you are convicted is to love much. And then I quote, in effect, this, or refer to this passage, forgiveness implies love. That's a technical, that arrow there, although it's a very bold version of it, is a symbolic logic arrow, right? It means, it means therefore, logically, if you have forgiveness, then you have love. And then if you have love, you have forgiveness. So those are the two aspects of the story. And the editors, you see, the editors are so wrapped up in their editorial work that their explanation of this, oh, well, Luke got these two texts confused. They're two different traditions. He's putting them together. Now, That's okay, except that the problem with that explanation is that it makes Luke into some sort of an idiot. Right? In other words, if he had these two stories that have a different moral, and he put them together and didn't notice it, you know what I'm saying? And if he did notice it and left it, apparently that it is not a proper understanding that there are two different traditions that I might associate with one end or the other of this paradox. You see? But what I'm saying here in the middle of this second page is forgiveness leads to love, and love leads to forgiveness. That is, and this is the great, I love it. See, Bertrand Russell will be proud of me, you see. This is just the sign in symbolic logic that love, if you've got love, you've got forgiveness. I mean, it's even, I want to say it's even more powerful in a certain sense than the equal sign. Do you see what I'm saying? These are, yes, you can distinguish love and forgiveness, but you can't separate them. You can't have one without the other. You see? Okay. And so that's the message from Luke. And what is it? It's another example of Leahy's idea that in the New Testament there's no such thing as a one-way street. You see? You cannot have a love that follows from forgiveness if the forgiveness is not somehow the following from the love that you have. Right? Now, if you want to describe that as a miracle, fine, be my guest. Okay? But that's the concrete structure. Right? So it's not because otherwise, think about it. It's really simple. Because if there weren't that, what the editors take to be a confusion, it's not a confusion at all. If there weren't that so-called confusion, see, it's not a confusion. Confusion means from the Latin confusio, with, fuse with. Oh, that Jew does a confusion somewhere. I quote him in the second back note to Beyond Sovereignty. There's no fusion, that's the point. Is there a withness going on is love identified with forgiveness in such a way that it's irrelevant, as it were? I can't think of one before the other. You see, in that sense in which I would have a temporal delay, a temporal beyond X. You see, because I can't have an ontological beyond X is really what I want to say here. You see, all right. So so what I was going to say was, imagine the contrary. Imagine the way the editors are thinking. They're still thinking in a very pedestrian way, because that's their job. They're editors. If this was a matter of confusing two different texts, then we'd be back to what? Conditional love. Yeah? You see? Or conditional forgiveness. It comes to the same thing. In other words, show a lot of love, I'll forgive you. Try this on some of your estranged relatives. I'll forgive you when you start loving me. But I'll forgive you. Okay. So it doesn't cut it here. It may cut it in our, fortunately or unfortunately, our everyday experience. But in the New Testament, it's not, that isn't the plane on which we are operating, or the Word is operating. All right. Okay. Then we have the parable of the sower. Again, we're familiar with that from Matthew. And again, if you would just look at the last line in that parable on 17:01 in verse 15, you have the 0, unum, 1 again. People with a noble and generous heart who have heard the word, 0, and take it to themselves, and yield a harvest, that's 1. Luke does it again. That really makes me think he's on to something here. And do so through their perseverance. The O comes last. So he reverses, right? He got the 3 in him. He keeps playing with the order for some reason or other, which I haven't. I'm just noting it. Okay. All right. Now let's see. We have to go to. Well, still on this point, I think it's, are we still, well, no, I've kind of, have I or not? I have. on the woman with the sin of point, I just wanted to, okay, so if I go back to my symbolism, the embodiment symbolism, so it's the same, but I just want to make explicit what I'm saying in the language that I've used elsewhere in slightly different contexts, right? So if Jesus is embodied in the Father, means that the Father is embodied in Jesus, you see. If the one who is fed by being embodied in one who is feeding him is in turn feeding someone else in whom he is embodied, and reciprocally so and so, right? Okay. So then this love forgiveness thing in the case of the woman who's sinner, it's the same kind. You could use the same kind of symbolism, right? Embodied in and embodying. In that sense, again, the two-way street. And the same with that apocalypse, right? If I shine the light on you, you're enlightened, but that also reveals something to me, all right? You are exposed when you are exposed to, or when the light is exposed to you, right? We're in a dark room and I take away the cover and the light exposes you and you're exposed to the light, right? And you can't have one without the other. All right, notice again in number 9, chapter 9 on 1703. He called the 12 together and gave them power and authority over all devils, and to cure diseases, sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and to heal. Again, the notion of Jesus transferring, as it were, for want of a better term, giving that power which he displays frequently, giving it over to his disciples as part of his commissioning of them. I just want to be careful not to skip. Okay. So we're going. The next big stop is going to be the Good Samaritan. On the way there, Peter's profession of faith on 1704, the condition of following Christ. Again, I want to quibble with the translation in verse 25, in 9:25. What benefit is it to anyone to win the whole world and forfeit or lose his very self? Well, I have news for the translators. There is no very self in the Greek. It's impossible. There's no such word. The ancients had the great historical blessing of not yet having to suffer through modernity. Okay, there is an auton. There is a reflexive. And so that legitimizes the kind of question that was raised by Alan earlier with regard to Jesus. There is a reflexive notion, but there's no substantive self that we can dispense with, so to speak, in that nominative sense. All right.
So what's being lost here? How would you translate that?
Well, if I had to translate it, your very being, in other words, if I were to translate it into English, I would translate it as your very. In other words, I would emphasize what they're trying to emphasize here is your very self, meaning your very self. You see what I'm saying? I'm saying a better way of putting that, which is not loaded, is your very being, or as I think he says elsewhere, your very life. What is the profit of man? Right? If he hasn't already said that, he probably has. You see what I'm saying? So you can get the notion across is that whatever you are or whatever life you are is at risk here, to say, without having to introduce this ontological notion of a self per se. That's all I want to do. I think I may have mentioned to you there was a great, otherwise great. I would say great. I really shouldn't say it. It probably isn't great. I'm being too generous. There was a new translation of Augustine's Confession that came out sometime after the year 2000. I remember seeing it when I was down in Baltimore, and I was interested in looking at it pedagogically because I was looking for a new translation. Because the one I like, which is the one I reference in my text somewhere, wherever you see me quoting Augustine's Confessions, you'll find the translation I'm talking about. I can't remember the guy's name, but it was published maybe in the 40s or the 50s in English. But that translation is perfectly faithful to the Latin, whereas this new one, this guy's talking he's got Augustine talking about his self all the time in the same sense. So if this wasn't an issue, it'd be Okay? But it happens to be I don't know if it's the whole issue, but it's central to what the issue of our time is. Okay. All right. Now, let's see. We got the mission of the 72. We got the mission of the 12. We just did that fleetingly. Then he sends out the 72. I think the editors point out to you that 12 is the number of the tribes of Israel, so that's the missions of the first of the Jews. And then the 72 is a Gentile number, according to the editors, so this is the kind of universal mission. All right. But again, he gives them the same power to cure, as well as the commission to preach the good news. And then we come to before we get to that, at the bottom of page 1706, the good news revealed to the simple, the Father and the Son. Just at this time, in verse 21, filled with joy by the Holy Spirit, he said, I bless you, Father, Lord of heaven and of earth, for hiding these things from the learned and the clever and revealing them to little children. Yes, Father, for that is what it has pleased you to do. There are echoes here. I think your editors also point out here there are echoes, or a lot of echoes of John in Luke's Gospel. See, Luke has he's got his distinctive message, but he's drawing on these other guys. So this is an echo of John here. Now, I've said this twice, and I haven't said what it is. Have I? I give you I give you an example. We're going to you give me 5 back for my 5, you give me 10. I'm putting you in charge of. You're going to rule over the 5 cities. You're going to get 10 cities, etc. So Luke is deeply a box 5 guy. Right? They're all into doing, but he's into the ruling aspect of the doing. You see, the being in charge.
Just invent another box.
What did I say?
5?
No, I'm sorry, I meant 3. Okay. But it's an odd number, so I get confused.
Worry.
Okay. All right. That's right, box 3. All right. Everything has been entrusted to me by my Father at the bottom of 1706, and no one knows the Son except the Father, and who the Father is except the Son.
Where is this?
At the bottom of 1706 and up on 1707. Okay. No one knows who the Son is except the Father, and no one who the Father is except the Son. So then again, you've got the two-way street, right? The Son knows who the Father is, and the Father knows who the Son, and that's a kind of, for openers, I was going to say, so I'm going to say it. That's an exclusive club. You see? It's the mystery, but however, which is now being revealed. That's the club which is now being opened. That's the club of divinity into which we are now being admitted here in a very careful way. It's not some guy. If you're in New York, you probably know about this one. Last week, some TV outfit, some internet outfit was giving away free stuff down in Union Square or something, and they announced they were going to give it away at 2 o'clock or whatever it was, right? They went down there with the free stuff to give away. I don't know what it was. Doesn't make any difference. Huh? Oh, cash. Oh, there you go. They had bags. Apparently, had naive. Went about naive. See, God is not that naive. So the guys on Union Square, they had a bag of cash. They were going to give everybody a little bit of cash, right, to promote themselves. And they got clobbered. They got mobbed to death. They were attacked by this mob of hungry people who just wanted the cash, right? And they were kind of surprised. They thought this had never happened in any other city. They had done this elsewhere, but this is the first New York. Might have been a bad day. But anyway, what made me think of that, okay, is that the revelation here is not, how can I put it? It's not unguarded. I mean, in other words, there's no reserve on God's part. But on the other hand, He knows who He's dealing with, right? So He's going to start with 12, then we'll do 72, right? And then maybe we'll do 3,000 when we get to Pentecost. Well, let's do this one step at a time. We're going to have some kind of orderly. So what I'm getting at, in other words, the revelation, the apocalypse is orderly. It's not simply, blow it all up and it's all done and over with. Now, we would like that. Of course, on the other hand, we don't have to talk about it. Right? But again, the fact that it's orderly, the fact that it works itself out in these successive forms of the incarnation, you see, is perfectly in keeping with the reality of the created world. Right? Which these guys, from wherever they were, they didn't have any clue about that. Okay. So, all right. So this is a club into which we have... there's another theme I want to bring up out of nowhere, which is implicit in everything I was saying last time, especially when we're on that question. I guess it came up last time, or the time before, or both times. It's fundamental to what we're doing. This question of the resurrection, the final resurrection when, in the language of Paul, when the bodies of our lowliness, says Paul, are conformed sum foron, sum morphon. I don't know what I said. Morphon? What? No, I'm doing it again. Some morphe shape, as in metamorphosis. Okay. This is not metamorphosis. This is summorphosis, is what Paul is talking about. When we are formed with the body of the risen Christ, we will be, as Jesus said, and again, wait till we get to that. Luke's really, he gets my prize for clever terminology, Luke does, but I'll say that. When we become, in Matthew's terms, in Jesus' mouth, as angels, and I was translating that into thinking now occurring, so when these essential persons are identified with the absolute person, then what we have is formally absolute persons. That's what I was saying, that we become like Mary is in some special sense from the get-go. We become in the resurrection, we become, along with her and Jesus, we become, again, I'm not crazy about the language, but we're over the angels, right? We become superior to the angels at that point. Why? Because we are in the form of God. We become, right, deiform. And so I was thinking about that, maybe because I was thinking about my Greek Orthodox friend. And there's another reason why you got to be very careful with these labels, you see. All right, so the Catholic Church, East and West, has understood that from the get-go, this is not a new idea, not an old idea, not a revolutionary idea in Christianity, that the whole impact of the ultimate impact of what's going on here in what we call the incarnation is the deification of the creature, that we become God. I already told you this in the case of Augustine, but it's not just Augustine. If you read any of the early church fathers, Greek, Latin, you name it, and the Greek term for this is theosis. Theos is God, and osis is quality of, and osmosis, right? Change. So the notion of theosis is fundamental here. And we were just working out in our context, as it turns out, you see, like something of the specific of the logic involved in that when we zero in on what theosis means in the context of the resurrection, or if you want, what the resurrection means in the context of theosis. But the notion that the ultimate impact of the incarnation, go back to Paul time. So you asked a simple question, which we could spend hundreds of years answering the question, what is salvation? Well, another answer. Salvation is becoming divine. Right? It's the beginning of becoming. It's the beginning of the, again, bad word, process. The beginning of the whatever the right word is for process. The beginning of the working out. I don't mind working out. The working out of the deification, which is a word I'm not crazy about, but it's a word that Thomas would understand. Of man. So what I told you when Thomas says that you go to heaven and God has to give you a deiform, well, that's his pre-Kantian, post-Aristotelian theological way of stating something which is universally understood by the fathers and by the tradition. Okay, now what triggered that? So I'm saying the beginning of this deification, this theosis, it's done carefully, right? It's not done recklessly, and it starts with the privilege of the disciples, as it's called, on page 1707. Then turning to his disciples, after having just said, I'm the only one who knows the Father, and the Father is the only one who knows me, then he turns to the disciples and says, blessed are the eyes that see what you see, for I tell you that many prophets and kings wanted to see what you see and never saw it, to hear what you hear and never heard it. And again, the word see there, by the way, is not a neutral term. It's apocalypsi. Right? Many a prophet was waiting for this apocalypse. Many a prophet, and you're in on it. Okay. The commandment about loving God with all your strength in the next paragraph, your neighbor as yourself. You have answered right, says Jesus, do this, and life is yours, again, emphasizing the doing. And then the parable of the Good Samaritan, verse 29, 1707, verse 29. But the man was anxious to justify himself and said to Jesus, and who is my neighbor? And Jesus tells him the famous parable, what is now the famous parable. A man was once on his way down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of bandits. They stripped him, beat him, and then made off, leaving him half dead. Now a priest happened to be traveling down the same road, but when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. In the same way, a Levite who came to the place saw him and passed by on the other side. And those are both establishment Jews, let's put it that way. Jews that you would be known for their piety in one way or another. But a Samaritan traveler who came on, and now the Samaritan, I think your footnote makes clear, and you probably know this already, the Samaritans were on the outs of the, well, we have the scene in John, the woman at the well, it's a Samaritan. And she's surprised on two counts. One, you wouldn't be surprised if you pay any attention to what's going on in the Middle East even today, right? That he's a man, that he talks to her. Yeah, this is already suspect. You don't do that. You don't just walk to a strange woman and talk to her in the middle of the town square. You don't do that. Number one. Number two, it's obvious to her he's a Jew and she's a Samaritan. So why would a Jew be talking to a Samaritan? That also doesn't cut it, right? Okay, that's not kosher. Just saying. All right. None of these, how can I put it, conventional obstacles phase Jesus. He just goes ahead in any event. But he's now turning that expectation in the minds of his hearers to his advantage to make the point, right? In other words, he knows that when he tells them that a Samaritan did this, he's making a point, right? I mean, this guy, you have we use that word prejudice, means prejudgment. That's what prejudice means, right? So the Jews had a prejudice about Samaritans, right? They prejudged them. They were all bad, period. That was it, right? So here, this guy whom you have a prejudice about, came on him, and he was moved with compassion. And you wouldn't be surprised. You just wouldn't be surprised that he was moved in his gut. You see, his move with compassion hasn't been verified by Luke. Right? He's moved with the same kind of gut-like love for this guy in the ditch that omnipotence is moved with in Luke's understanding in creating the world or in saving the world, right? So he was moved in his gut. When he saw him, he went up to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them. He then lifted him onto his own mount and took him to an inn and looked after him. Next day he took out 2 denarii, handed them to the innkeeper and said, look after him, and on my way back I will make good any extra expense you have. Which of these 3 do you think proved himself a neighbor to the man who fell into the bandits' hands? And he replied, the one who showed pity towards him. And here, again, the Greek showed pity. I mean, it's accurate, but it's more pointed in Greek. It's not only more pointed, it's more poiesas. It's poial. That's why it's pointed. Right? It's the one who does him, who does mercy to him, in other words, you see, who acts mercifully toward him, I think would be a more vivid translation of the Greek. And then, of course, in case you didn't get it, Jesus in the Greek says, go and sue poie, and you do act the same way. Now, you'll notice, you see, on one level, the traditional thing about this, I think it's obvious when you read it, again, you're paying careful attention. The question is not answered directly. The question is, who is my neighbor? Okay? And when Jesus tells the parable, at the end of it he says, now which of these three guys walking down the road was a neighbor to the guy in the ditch? Do you see? And it turns out that it goes to my notion, you see, of if you act toward another as if he were your neighbor, he is your neighbor. Right? In other words, you can't. Right? You see?
Kierkegaard says that.
Well, you probably had this in mind, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So what I'm getting at is, all right. So he reverses it. The question is not who is my neighbor as if they were an object. Like there was a neighbor out here toward whom I may or may not act in a certain way on a certain day. Do you follow what I'm getting at? In other words, like there was a neighbor next door. That's the way we normally think because we're all living in sandboxes. So the guy that has a sandbox next to mine is my neighbor right there. And then but maybe he's not really my neighbor for some reason. That's the thrust of the guy's question. Right? But the real question is if I can't predefine, that's it. You see, I cannot predefine my neighbor. My neighbor comes into being just the way the world comes into being for omnipotence in the act of neighboring. Right? In the act of loving the world comes into being. In the act of being a neighbor to someone, he comes into being as my neighbor, then and there, you see. Okay. All right, then Martha wouldn't like this. If Martha was Luther, she'd take this passage out of this text.
What's the point of this?
Well, the point is that if you're going to compare, Martha is doing the housework. I mean, I'm sure you can relate to this. Right? You got company, you got guests, right? And you got a sister, right? And you're in the kitchen, you're trying to get everything ready in time and everything, have a nice dinner and everything, and she's in there talking like there was nothing to do. And he says, Mary, calm down, relax. She's chosen the better part. See? I don't know what the point of it is.
Calm down.
Yeah, he tells Martha to relax. She's overly anxious. The most important thing is, in other words, if you ask me, you're forcing me. I wanted to pass right past, but since you're saying what's the point, I have to come on. It's my obligation as a teacher. I have to go up to the point. I would say the point is Martha's doing everything she's doing as for her guest. Okay. But she's gotten wrapped up in the preparations. Now here's preparations in a negative sense, right? She's gotten wrapped up in these means toward this end, whereas Martha's gone right to the what's really important is that he's come to see us today, and she wants to take absolutely full advantage of that. Now it's it's a kind of a parable, so it's an extreme statement. But if you're going to choose between getting the meal ready and talking to the guest, you should talk to the guest. That's the point. Now,
nothing would have been said, nothing would have been done. They would have just been talking and no eating.
You're right. But they might have been very happy. You never know. And they might have gone out, or sent out for Chinese or something. Who knows? We have to be careful. Then we get a shorter version of the Lord's Prayer. And
let me go back to that.
Oh, you're not happy? All right.
I thought you were going to say something different.
Okay.
That the doing here is, I can't remember the words you used, but like having a plan in the negative sense, and that there's another way to be doing what she's doing.
Well, I think that's true. Yeah, I just don't think there's enough there to be terribly definitive about it, but I think you could say there's something like that. Yeah, it's a kind of a planning ahead, whereas Mary's there already, so to speak. Yeah.
Okay. She could be there in the kitchen.
And, it would be an interesting question whether, to take Baltrout's approach, if we were to rewrite the story and have them both talking to him and no one making any preparation meal, I don't know. Maybe that would have been the end of the story. Or you would have to add on another paragraph, and then became time for dinner, and
I think that's the distinction it's making is between doing and doing the right thing.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Yeah. The better part is even. In fact, in Greek, it's agathon. It's the good thing.
Needed, not spreading about what's not needed.
Well, needed what's being done here is also done resentfully.
Yes. And also, yes, she's not just doing it, but she's resentful or anxious and a few other things. Yeah. That is? Okay. So then, as I say, we get a shorter version, which is Luke's won't on the Lord's Prayer on page 1708. And then the notion of, this is interesting because we were talking, Nancy had asked that forum question about prayer, and we discussed it last time, and I gave my answer on the forum. And then here we have a reiteration of something we found in Matthew, and apparently in John. I don't remember the passage in John, but apparently it's related also to John, but certainly to Matthew. The idea of persisting in prayer, right? Not what is it? Ask, search, and knock, and then the notion of persisting in prayer here, effective prayer in this text on 1708. So I say to you, ask and it will be given to you, search and you will find, knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, everyone who searches finds, everyone who knocks will have the door opened. What father among you, if his son asks for a fish, would hand him a snake? Or if he asks for an egg, hand him a scorpion. If you then, evil as you are, know how to give your children what is good, how much more will the Heavenly Father give the Holy Spirit to those who ask Him? And your editor points out, or editors point out, that in Matthew, whatever it says, it's not so specific. In other words, we'll give a good thing to... God will give you a good thing just as a father would give bread to a son, not a stone, whereas Luke specifies the Holy Spirit, you see. And what I want to emphasize in Luke is I've already emphasized the ruling that you come into rule here. Now I want to parse that a little further when we finally get into the handout. But whatever the ruling position is of those who do the right thing, whatever it means to be in charge in that sense, you see, is to be productive, right? And again, it's not a chicken. See, I was going to say it's not a chicken. That's the whole point. Aristotle had a serious question about chicken and egg, but in the thinking now occurring and in the New Testament, there is no chicken and egg problem. Right? I can get off on chicken and egg. Luke, rulers, produces, in charge of, feeding the members of the household, etc. Increase, that's what I want to get to. The question that Serena raised on the forum a week or two back on the question of authority, to which I reprised my answer from the questions class last year, that authority has all to do with providing, with nourishing, providing what is needed to eat, and growth and increase is all wrapped up in the very notion of authority. So I want to generalize that in the thinking now occurring, specify it is the correct term, not generalizing. I want to specify it as the ruling here that Luke is pointing to, the being put in charge, is what I'm calling created omnipotence in Beyond Sovereignty. When the good servants get put in charge of the many cities, they get put in charge of the so-called, I want to go over this, the property of the master. You see, they're being put in charge of the world, but it's not static. That's what I'm trying to get at. Authority is all about increasing. It's about creating. It's about growing the world, as it were, for want of a better term. I'll come back to that. But so then when Luke says, when he modifies Matthew's parable, so that when you knock persistently and the Father finally gives you the good thing in Matthew's terms, that you're asking for. Luke doesn't say the good thing you're asking for. He says he gives you the Holy Spirit. And I want to say, this is a little cute, but it's right at the heart of it. He gives you the gift that keeps on giving. That's good. And that's the, in other words, what the Father gives His children is the gift of giving. You see, the gift of producing. Right? In the Creed, which I gave you a copy of, the Nicene Creed, Zopoion, I think he's called, the Holy Spirit, which is translated in the English translation I also gave with it traditionally, the giver of life. Okay, but it's also the poi idea. It's the maker of life too. You see, the creator in some sense. Thomas makes a distinction that the world was created through the Word, through the Logos, as the beginning of the Gospel says. But Thomas says, so the Word, the second person, was He through whom the Word was created. But he says that the Spirit is Thomas now, the principle of the creation. Right? So the creation of the world is not it's a combo, right? It's the Spirit, the Word and the Spirit are both of them each in their own distinctive ways in on the creation of the world. Okay, so it's not what I'm getting at is that it's part and parcel of what is implicit in Luke's text. He's not writing a philosophical or theological treatise, so I don't think he's hitting you over the head with in the way in which I'm trying to bring it out of his text, right? But it's all there if you read it carefully and say, what's different here? What's being different here is this being put in charge. Yeah, the world being handed over to the faithful servant. You see that? And that's the doing box. That's not the fifth box. That's the third box, the 3D box. It's the box of doing the right thing, the box of ruling. All right. Then open and fearless speech. On page 1710, just about the middle of the page, in the middle of that section called Open and Fearless Speech, third paragraph in the end of that section, I tell you, if anyone openly declares himself for me in the presence of human beings, the Son of Man will declare himself for him in the presence of God's angels. And the contrary. Anyone who disowns me in the presence of human beings will be disowned in the presence of God's angels. And if you look in the margin there's a reference to Matthew 10:32, which I want to go back to. So if you keep your place in Luke and go back to Matthew 10, what did I say? 10:32. It's really neat in the Greek. It's really very precise. Matthew's version of that, which I think is pretty much verbatim. So if anyone declares himself to me in 10:32 Matthew, 16:26, page 16:26 at the top. If anyone declares himself to me in the presence of human beings, I will declare myself to him in the presence of my Father in heaven. And again, the same contrary. What he says more precisely in the Greek is really neat. Pas hostis homologese en emoi. Let me stop there. Everyone, hostis who, and here's the word, homologese. The logese part is the logos part, speaks. The homo would be, can be translated like the same, terrible word. The identical like, Jesus is of the homo, is homoousios. He is of the same substance, the identical substance of the Father. That's in the Creed. So it has all of those ways of translating it, right? You could also translate it in accord with. So what I'm trying to get at is what Jesus actually says here. And then the en emoi would be in me, and I just want to amplify the en me, in me, as embodied in me. So if I translate it closely, simultaneously, close to the Greek, in the context of the thing now occurring, it says, everyone who embodied in me speaks accordingly. Everyone who is embodied. We want to talk about being properly and improperly embodied. Do you see? Everyone, if the resurrected Christ is, according to the thinking now occurring, and implicitly, if not explicitly, I think explicitly we'll see in the epistles of the Hebrews, if the universe is the body of the resurrected Christ, then everyone is, willy-nilly, whether you like it or not, everyone is embodied. in the resurrected Christ, right? So the issue then is not the guys who embodied me are going where to go, right? And the guys who ain't, no, that's too easy. That's too easy. The problem is everybody's embodied. So the ones who are embodied in me and speak accordingly, right? Well, those guys, now watch this. Like he was paying attention, like he was actually listening to what we're doing here. Jesus says, well then, kago, that's kai, ego, and, well, homologeso, and auto, I embodied in that guy, in everyone who embodied in me speaks accordingly, then I embodied in each of those guys who speak accordingly, I will embody in them I will speak accordingly. So I will, if you confess me, I'll put it in pedestrian, traditional Christian terms, if I confess Christ, Christ will confess me. But it's much more rigorously defined, you see, ontologically. It's not just I'm going around confessing Christ. I have to be confessing Christ as embodied in Him and speaking according to that being embodied in Him. And He's going to confess me before His Father in the same exact two-way street, mutual parallel. So it's just too neat to let it pass. All right, so it's reiterated by Luke, who apparently saw it was significant. Then we have don't hoard possessions, because even if you have more, this is kind of ironic. Even if you put everything in your barn and you got more than enough, you think you can just sit back and you lose your life that night. What a fool you have been. All right. I think the idea I said last time, I found myself saying in passing, which I'm going to stick to, that in the New Testament, if you find that you have enough, you're not getting the message, right? You always got more than enough. We say, well, how does that apply to this guy who filled up he built barns to put all his more than enough in, right? Well, he was putting away for tomorrow. You see? So even though in some quantitative sense, in some beyond X sense, he had more than enough, he didn't have more than enough. Because he wouldn't have had to build those barns and store all that stuff for tomorrow. He was like the birds of the air and the lilies of the field, you see. They are the ones who have what they need and more. Okay. And I think that's what we do there, birds of the air stuff. We're familiar with that one, I think. All right. Now, being ready for the Master's return. I already emphasized that on page 1711. This is a variation. Well, there were a couple of these in him. There's this, and there's the one called the Parable of the Pound someplace later on. But this one will do to make the point. They all make the same point in slightly different ways, but all in ways which I would say are distinctive to Luke. So, for example, if you look in verse 41 following on 1711, Peter said, Lord, do you mean this parable for us or for everyone? The Lord replied, who then is the wise and worthy steward, oikonomos, right? The distributor of the dwelling in the language that I use throughout Beyond Sovereignty. Who is the trustworthy oikonomos, whom the master will place over his household to give them at the proper time their allowance of food? I was referring to that earlier. Blessed that servant if his master's arrival finds him doing exactly that. I tell you truly, he will put him in charge of everything he owns. And see, I want to say, take that literally. Take that literally. All right. Parable, transfer of parable. If the Lord in the parable is the Lord God, He will put His trustworthy servants. How does He call them? Yeah, trustworthy servants. In charge of everything of the universe. Make it simple. Make it easy. All right, and then we have the basis of that traditional saying we have in English at the bottom of that page. When someone is given a great deal will be demanded of that person. When someone is entrusted with a great deal of that person, even more will be expected. And there you have the Greek perissos, in this case perisoteron. Even more than enough will be expected, right? So. When omnipotence puts the creature in charge of the universe, omnipotence expects there's no limit there's no boundary, there's no limit to the return on its investment that it expects. Well, I don't know that it's a test unless I'm missing something. It's just that it's a test in effect.
Right.
It's not a real. In other words, if I'm hearing your question correctly, in the parable here, and I think also in the parable of the pounds and the talents, we're adding on the notion of test. In other words, I don't think the master says, I'm going to give you a test. He just has a servant who's supposed to be doing this, and when he was away and he comes back and finds him doing that, he's rewarded for doing what he's supposed to do, even when he had the opportunity not to do it. And I think that applies to the pounds and the talents, namely, when he went away, he gave them this money, and some of them acted faithfully or in a way that justified his trust, and one of them didn't in the case of the pound story. So, well, now it gets more complicated. Well, in the thinking now occurring, being put in charge, meaning the imperative to create the world, is related to the incarnation, and therefore it's related to the forgiveness of sin, more specifically the forgiveness of original sin. So if it's a reward for following, a reward that follows upon one's. See, the problem here is the same kind of problem we've been talking about. It's a problem that it's very difficult to think in these non-spatial terms. So the readiness of the disciple, if you want, the readiness of the disciple, the faithfulness of the disciple, the doing the right thing of the disciple, the reward for that is creating the world, being put in charge of the world? Yes. Now that you've got me thinking about this, are you? I mean, this one I hadn't anticipated. Now that you've got me thinking about it, I think this is right. What comes to mind is the reward, the fulfillment of the reward begins in the incarnation. In the thinking now occurring as page 1 of the first handout, the third stage where Jesus sends the Word or embodies the Word, whereas before we have the Spirit and the Father embodied. That third stage, which coincides with the thinking now occurring, would be the further fulfillment of the New Testament in the sense which I articulated on the last handout, the immediacy versus mediacy, which in turn is an immediacy to the end of the world, which is the second immediacy, the immediacy properly lacking to the second mediation, the mediation properly lacking to this mediation, which is the thinking now occurring. Are you with me? Okay. So if you force me to, which I'm happy that you're doing this, I would say the ultimate reward coincides with that mediation properly lacking to the thinking now occurring. In other words, the ultimate creating, the ultimate state, see, it's not a state. that ultimate dynamic reality of creating the world is what we refer to in the New Testament as the new heaven and the new earth. It's new all the way down. It's always new. It's not a stasis, even though the picture of the New Jerusalem seems kind of, quiet. Not much commotion, not much going on, you know what I'm saying? It's kind of peaceful. That peace is the peace of creation. So I would say if we're at the beginning of the resurrection, we're at the beginning of the reward, but it's not the full fulfillment of the reward. Does that make any sense? Okay. All right. Trust in providence, so there we go. All right. So, being ready for the Master's return, that's what triggered that. Oh, the fig tree, I just wanted to, I alluded to this, but let me just zero in on page 1712. In both of the other Gospels we read, Matthew and Mark, Jesus zaps the fig tree. Both times because it's not bearing any figs. Mark, who doesn't have any time to waste because it's not the season of figs, is no excuse. Right? That cuts to the chase. That isn't said by Matthew. And in fact, they're only on the way back, I think, when they notice. Luke turns it into a parable. But here's what I wanted to get at. We get that kind of soft side of Luke in the sense that the guy in the parable says, well, okay, it's not bearing, but leave it one more year and give me time to dig around it and manure it. It may bear fruit next year. If not, then you can cut it down. So in other words, Luke gives us a delay. In fact, I think it is relevant to my answer that I just gave to Zarina's question. All right. In other words, we have the New Testament as the immediacy. We have the thinking now occurring as a mediation of that immediacy, qua essentially new form of thought, between that immediacy and this mediation, and between this mediation as immediacy and that final the mediation which is properly lacking, we have another year in the language of this text. You see, we have some time to manure it and water it, but here's the point. A second chance is a second chance. As my friend Percy would tell you, if it's second, it's last. Yeah, do you get a second chance? Sure you do. You see? But the second chance is your last chance. This is it. Right? There will come a day beyond which there is no going, so to speak. Right? Okay. So look, two birds. Then we have the narrow door. It's a similar idea, which I don't want to pursue it now, just for the sake of time. I want to get to we did the put and child. Let's see, what are we up to? 17. Okay. I have a 6 here. I think what I want to get to, I want to get to today's handout, so you have that. Luke 16, I quote the passage that I'm interested in on the handout, so you can look at it either way. But on the handout, I've put in some of the Greek. So on the first page of today's handout, what is this called in Luke? Craft. Yeah. Okay. All right. So Luke says, he also said to his disciples, there was a rich man and he had a steward. And I point out to you again, it's our friend the oikonomos. That's the accusative case. Who was denounced to him for being wasteful. Diascorpidzone with his property, and I'm going to come back to that. Hupar kanta. He called for the man and said, what is this I hear about you? Draw me up an account of your stewardship, because you are not going to be my steward any longer. Then the steward said to himself, now that my master is taking the stewardship from me, what am I to do? Dig? I am not strong enough. Go begging? I should be ashamed. I know what I will do to make sure that when I am dismissed from office, that is from his oikonomia in the Greek, there will be, which is, by the way, both his livelihood and his livelihood is the providing nourishment, as we know from the other parable, for the members of the household. And when I am dismissed from office, there will be some to welcome me into their homes. Then he called his master's debtors one by one. To the first he said, how much do you owe my master? 100 measures of oil. The steward said, here, take your bond, sit down, and quickly write 50. To another he said, and you, sir, how much do you owe? 100 measures of wheat. He said, the steward said, take your bond and write 80. Now here's the clinker, huh? So the master praised this honest steward. The oikonomantes adikias. Dike in Greek is right. It's the right. Now I think my friend Hegel. Hegel has a great book on the philosophy of right. What would it be? Rex, right? Rex. How would you say it? Rex. That's in German. It's a great. Holstein doesn't like it. He thinks that it's late Hegel, that he's not the same Hegel he always was. Holstein thinks that Hegel on the right is too conservative. It's not radical enough, is it? I don't buy any of that. I mean, there's no. I mean, if you're Heidegger, you're Heidegger from beginning to end. If you're Hegel, I'm not saying there's not new thought, but it's not like these guys are betraying themselves. Why did I think of that? Because it's really hard to do justice. Hegel does do justice to it, by the way. It's really hard to do justice in English to the notion of the right, with a capital R, the right. You're tempted to translate it as justice. That's the way we would do it. I'm not sure that's fully adequate to what's there. In the Greek, you have a similar situation that Hegel is using there in German. Dike means, again, same problem. We could translate it in English as justice. Another nice root translation of it in Greek is the way. Okay? I've heard this analogy twice recently on television. I don't know what I'm watching. Somebody illustrating that freedom doesn't mean doing anything you want gave the analogy, which is repeated 14th hand, that I'm repeating to you. You may have heard it therefore before. That when is a train more free? When it's on its track or off its tracks? Obviously a train can only move along if it's on tracks. Okay. So justice has to do with something, probably, DK in that sense. I've got myself off onto a treatise on justice, which was not my intention. I just want to say, I want to note to you what is translated, I think, elsewhere in this text as dishonest. It doesn't bring out the full depth of it, okay? In other words, this steward somehow or other, this oikonomos, is somehow or other there's something not right about him with a capital R. Okay? That's what I want to get, all right? However, all that being said, the master praises him for his, when I say somewhere else, right here it's translated as dishonest, okay? Adiak is the alpha privet, right? Not right, capital R. For his astuteness, for his wisdom, phronimos. And not just for wisdom in an abstract, but poiesin, poiao, for acting, doing wisely, all right? For the children of this world are more astute, that is just more wise, is what it says, again, the same word in the Greek, in dealing with their own kind, than are the children of light. And so I tell you this, use money, tainted as it is, to win you friends, and thus make sure that when it fails you, that is the money, these friends you won by using this unrighteous mammon would be another way. I don't know whether I don't know whether King James translates it that way, but I can imagine that in King James it would be translated that way. Unrighteous mammon would be a possible translation of that. These editors are very careful. This money, tainted as it is, they say, they're kind of gingerly dancing around the edge of that, and there's a reason for it in the Greek. I mean, in the use of the genitive there. And so I tell you, tainted as it is to win you friends, and thus make sure that when it fails you, they will welcome you into eternal dwellings. Anyone who is trustworthy in little things, now here trustworthy, interesting enough, is pistos, right? Faithful, right? So faithfulness implies but you would like this, a sense of fidelity, you see, right? This again, not just an intellectual thing, but remaining true to something, in Badiou's case, you've seen in the way of an event, or in this context, being remaining true to your obligations as the oikonomos to your kurios, to your Lord, see? Anyone who is trustworthy, or pistos, in little things is trustworthy in the least thing, is what the Greek says, literally. In great things, or in the great thing. Anyone who is not right in little things is not right in great. If then you who are trustworthy with money, that tainted thing...
Not trustworthy.
I'm sorry?
No.
Not trustworthy, I'm sorry. Who will trust you with genuine riches? And there's the alethinon, which is the aletheia root, truth, the real thing, the genuine, the real, the true wealth, understood. There's no word for riches there in the Greek. And if you are not trustworthy, with what is not yours, what belongs to another, what is another's, I guess it would be the most literal, who will give you, that's literal, what is your very own. And again, I would get rid of the own there if I were translating this originally, right? Which is yours, and actually, as I'm going to point out later on on the handout, it's an idiom in Greek, humeteron, is your part, your share, or depending on the context, your business, right? No servant can be the slave of two masters. He will either hate the first and love the second, or be attached to the first and despise the second. You cannot be the slave of both of God and of money. And then I bring in here the passage that we've already alluded to. I think we alluded to. We didn't do it, huh? We didn't do it. Okay. But this gets to the heart of it a good deal. I mentioned the part about the Father, which is central to it. And the other one is, what's wrong with the prodigal son? And what do we mean? Prodigal, we're so used to that term in English anyway. Prodigal son is a cliche. What is a prodigal son? Bad guy. Prodigal means wasteful. That's what it means. Okay. So the prodigal son, says Luke, wasted his substance. The translator, by the way, that's my translation. The translation in the text says wasted his money. Now there's a reason for that, because that's context. But literally the Greek is ousion, which is nicer. He wasted his substance living dissolutely. Now I thought of Faltrout, because asotos there, the last Greek word, which I'm translating as dissolute, is not sotos, which is soter, soteria, say. Right? What does it mean to be saved? I got another answer for you. To be saved is to be preserved. It's not to be wasted. See? Okay. So the salvation. So when we read Paul after our little break there at the end of the month, when we read Paul's going to talk in Romans about the world, the universe is nature, he says, is waiting for the salvation of the sons of what? The sons of God, or something like that, he says, for its salvation. You see? So Paul understands that whatever the wasting of the creature in the person of human beings is not something different from the wasting of the creation, insofar as we distinguish the creation from the simply human, you see. So we have nature and man, to put it in more common terms. Their salvation is the identical salvation that we're talking about here, right? At different aspects of it. Okay, so the prodigal son is the guy who is wasting it, just like this steward, right? Like the crafty steward. Now the first obvious question is, wait a minute, how can he be praised for reducing the debts of these other guys, right? And our editors good and bad. There's no such as bad editors, right? So they have a nice little footnote that explains that in the ancient world, the steward, as they call him, the oikonomos, he got his pay in the form of a commission, a percentage of whatever business he did on behalf of his master. He got a cut, okay? So what he's doing, the editors explain to you, is that he's foregoing his cut, which he is entitled to, because we got two different questions here, right? The individual transaction, in some sense, is not an issue here. He's just generally been wasteful, all right? There's an ambiguity in it, I admit, okay? But following the lead of the editors, he's entitled, at least strictly speaking, he's entitled to his commission, and he tells them in effect just to reduce what they owe, because he's not going to collect his commission, what otherwise would be going to the master. So the editors point out the master has nothing to lose. I want to say, well, how can we understand that in an ontological sense and in a thinking now occurring sense? So I say, if it is true that it is prudent of the unjust steward, a child of this world, to use his... Did I finish the thought? Yeah. Okay. To use his commissions to provide for himself in this world, then how much more should the children of the light use the wealth of / tainted by injustice, the goods of the world after the fall? That's what I'm adding on here now, right? So I'm doing a little exegesis here. I'm saying that if I take this parable and apply it to the thinking now occurring, then the crafty steward is fallen humanity that whose fallenness consists in its being relieved of its responsibility due to its wastefulness. And again, we do that sequentially. Do you see what I'm saying? But in beyond X, the sequence is just for the convenience and a dangerous way of our putting it. To say the fall is at one and the same time the wasting of the creation and the punishment. To say to provide for themselves in the world to come. Okay. So, at 2, how real then is the lack? Now, this is I think the central point I want to make. Then how real is the lacking of and this goes back to the original question at the beginning of class. How real is the lacking of the creation to the Creator, as the commissions of the unjust steward do not revert to his master, but remain his to dispose of as he chooses, even after his fall from grace? Do you see? So when omnipotence creates ex nihilo, when it exposes itself in the language of beyond sovereignty, you see, exposes itself, risks itself, in the sense that my good Jesuit who lost his telescope job at the Vatican may have had in mind, I can't say that he did have it in mind, when omnipotence risks everything in creating, then one of the corollaries of that is that even if you are receiving this, even if you are in the position of created omnipotence, you can be so improperly without it ceasing to be the case that there is this break between the Creator and the creature. All of which, by the way, what I just said in that last long sentence is said a little more carefully probably in that appendix to Beyond Sovereignty, a third appendix on evil. Number 3, can even be used prudently by him, that is the unjust steward, to avert the worst worldly consequences of his lack of righteousness, and of his consequently, and to avert the worst worldly consequences of his lack of righteousness and of his consequently imprudent malfeasance in office, his not doing the right thing. And I again refer you to the index, you see, where he's being dismissed for malfeasance, to say, but what I'm saying here, maybe somewhat cryptically, is that his malfeasance, his not doing the right thing in box 3, is his being wasteful, is not being productively receptive in box 4, you see, of the creation which he has received from his master, his office, his oikonomia. All right, so over on page 2, I just spell out what I've already said. The unjust steward I understand to be the fallen humanity, humanity wasteful of God's creation. So wastefulness is the key. Wastefulness is bad, right? You could make a real case. Here we have a show on the ecological implications of salvation. Right? Okay. Wealth of injustice, commissions of unjust house manager, the goods of this world. I'm just equating those things, and I'm drawing the conclusion somewhere here. Oh, the next little paragraph on page 2. What is not properly yours, wealth of injustice, world and property, but really lacking to omnipotence. I didn't get to the point I want to make. Oh, no, it's in the second paragraph. That wastefulness, injustice, fall does not altogether vitiate the goodness of the creation. Which is just another way of saying what I was saying a few minutes ago about the reality of the creation, even when it is improperly shared by the creature. Yes.
Quick question. What's children of the light?
Well, let's see. I don't know whether to put the Greek. Futos. Let's see. Where was that?
It's both bottom of page 1 in that. It's also at the top in the large.
Yeah, but I mean, there's one place where I put the Greek in, right? I thought I did.
Oh. But what is it?
For the children of this world.
Yeah.
Children of the light.
But here's what.
What does it mean?
Okay, the way I interpret it in this context is that the light is, remember, what is light? It's the apocalypse. It's the revelatory light. The word is, go back to the creed that I gave you a copy of. Phos ek photos. Light from light. True God from true God. So the light is shining in the world. Go back to the beginning of John's Gospel, right? Jesus, the incarnate Word, is the light, right? The light shines. It apocalypses you. It apocalypses you. I'm going to have to invent a word. Apocalypses you. And you are now apocalypsed. You are revealed. You're shown to be what? A sinner. Do you see? Okay. Now, the shining of the light it announces to the creatures that they are sinners. They either accept that, they are either convicted of that, not condemned, but convicted of that sinfulness, you see, and embrace the message, okay, and start acting accordingly like a bird or a flower, or not, okay. Now, since we're on children, I just want to end, just taking advantage of one more minute here, on Luke 20, which I quote at the bottom of the page. And this is what I was alluding to before. In Luke 20, so we got children of the light. Now, in the resurrection, we're going to have children of the resurrection. Luke 20 says, and this is what I love about Luke, he says in the Greek, eisin eis angeloi. So in other words, in Matthew, Jesus says, hos angeloi. They will be in the resurrection as angels, and Luke takes it one step further. He creates a word, eis angeloi. See? I think he had the makings of a philosopher, Luke did, right? They are equal angels. It's hard to do in English, so I wound up, my solution was angel equals, to get the thrust of it, right? So in the resurrection, you're going to be angel equals. But look what Luke says. Why? They are angel equal. I mean, it's Jesus talking through Luke, right? They are angel equals, even as children of God, being children of the resurrection. In other words, they are the children of God. They are the fulfillment of theosis, of the deification that is the upshot of the incarnation. They are such qua children of the resurrection. So in the resurrection, this just kind of reinforces what I was saying on the last handout. In the resurrection, these essential persons take on become as, or isoi, equally formal persons. They become in the form of absolute persons. They become formally divine. They become children of God. Precisely, says Luke, being, antes, since they are, understand, being children of the resurrection. So, because of the resurrection, in and through the resurrection, however you want to put it, they become the children of God. And we have to end there, because we pushed the clock. We can take up questions, or if you have questions, use the form. Okay, Sarah?
Okay, thank you very much, and I'll hear you all next week.
Yeah, okay. All right.
All right.
We'll be in touch. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.